An old canine, once a hero, now discarded like yesterday's trash. No badge, no handler. Just frostbitten paws and empty eyes staring through a glass window at a five-star restaurant. Warm meals inside. Outside. Nothing but snow, hunger, and silence. No one stopped, no one cared, until he did. A young police officer, battle-hardened by duty but quietly broken inside, looked into the eyes of a dog everyone else ignored. What happened next will leave you speechless, because this isn't just about a stray dog finding a meal. It's about a forgotten hero helping solve a crime no one could crack, just to thank the man who gave him a second chance. Before we start, tell me where you're watching from. Drop your country in the comments. And if you believe every animal deserves dignity, not abandonment, hit that subscribe button, because what you're about to hear will stay with you forever. The town of Silverbrook, tucked beneath the snowy shoulders of northern Colorado, lay buried under its fifth consecutive day of snow. It was the kind of winter that silenced everything: roads, rivers, and hearts. By 9 o'clock p.m., the streets had emptied, and the only signs of life came from the orange glow behind cabin windows and the occasional whir of snowplows crawling through ice-covered roads. On the corner of Main and Halter, where a line of closed shops sat like frozen ghosts, one place remained defiantly lit: Lakeside Grill, a warm, cedar-paneled restaurant well known among locals for its elk burgers and firewood pizza, and among out-of-towners for its candlelit ambiance. Tonight, the soft jazz playing inside mixed with laughter and the rhythmic clink of glasses. Through its large bay windows, one could see servers weaving between tables, families leaning into comfort food, and wine poured into long-stemmed glasses. Outside, on the icy sidewalk, stood a forgotten Shadow, a German shepherd, older than most would guess, hunched near the window. His coat, once a vibrant mix of tan and black, was now faded to an uneven dullness, marked by splotches of dirt, ash, and snow. One ear, slightly torn, stood only half alert, weighed down by fatigue and cold. His body was thin, almost skeletal beneath the thick fur. The tremble in his legs wasn't fear, it was exhaustion. He stood still, unmoving, except for the shallow rise and fall of his breath. Shadow's brown eyes, sunken yet sharp, watched through the glass. His gaze wasn't fixed on the people, or the warmth, but the food. Steam rolled off a plate of roasted duck. A child licked honey butter from her fingers. A basket of garlic bread passed down a table. The smells wafting out through cracks in the doorway teased memories he could no longer place. Then he raised a paw, stiff, cracked at the edges, and tapped the window. Tap, tap, tap. The sound was light, softer than knuckles, more tentative than begging. A rhythm of habit, as if some part of him still remembered how to signal for help, how to ask permission. No one looked. One man glanced up briefly, frowning. A waiter brushed past the window, oblivious. A couple shifted in their seats for a better angle to photograph their dessert. Shadow lowered his paw, but didn't move. He stared on, enduring the cold pressing against his sides like stone. Snow continued to fall, landing and melting on his ears, his snout, his spine. A few blocks down, walking with heavy steps, Officer Nathan Cole made his way along the frozen sidewalk. Nathan, 32, tall, clean-cut but rugged, wore a thick patrol coat that clung to his frame, dark hair peeking beneath a department-issued wool cap. The sleeves of his uniform were dusted with dried road salt. He'd just finished a 12-hour shift, one that began with a car accident and ended with a domestic dispute, both unresolved. His boots were soaked through, his fingers numb inside his gloves. Nathan was the kind of man who rarely showed what he felt, not because he didn't feel, but because he had learned that control over breath, tone, and emotion was its own kind of survival. His father, a respected sheriff, had been killed in the line of duty when Nathan was just 11. Since then, Nathan had learned to grow up too fast. He didn't mind the snow. He preferred walking after his shift. It gave him distance from the noise, the paperwork, the hum of radios that never quite turned off. As he passed Lakeside Grill, Nathan was about to glance away, like everyone else, until he heard it. Tap, tap, tap. He stopped. The sound was so out of place, so gentle against the backdrop of wind and winter silence, that for a moment he thought he'd imagined it. Then he heard it again. He turned toward the restaurant window and squinted. At first all he saw was the reflection of the street behind him. Then the shape emerged faintly, as if carved from snow itself. 4 legs, drooping head, pointed ears, a tail still and low. A dog. Nathan blinked, frozen, not from the cold, but from recognition. There was something in the posture, the expression, the patience of the creature on the other side of the glass that pulled at something old inside him. Tap. The dog raised its paw again, and that's when Nathan truly looked. His breath caught. The frost on the restaurant window had begun to melt from Shadow's shallow breath. He stood there, ears drooping from fatigue, nose brushing the glass, paw halfway raised mid-tap, as if unsure whether another try would make a difference. Inside the warmth of Lakeside Grill, a waiter emerged from the swinging kitchen doors, arms loaded with a heavy tray of half-eaten dishes cleared from a recently vacated table. He was tall, perhaps early 30s, wearing a neatly pressed white shirt beneath a black vest with the restaurant's logo stitched in gold. His name tag read Tyler, his brow perpetually furrowed, features sharp and impatient. His narrow eyes flicked toward the window as he approached the back door leading to the dumpster out back. He paused mid-step. "Not you again," he muttered, clicking the latch open with his elbow. He pushed the door wide with his hip, letting in a brief gust of warm air that mixed with the frigid night. The noise startled Shadow, who stepped back but held his ground. Tyler exited briskly, letting the door swing close behind him. "Damn mutt," he said louder this time. Now only a few feet from Shadow, he tilted the tray forward and, with one swift motion, dumped its contents into the metal bin. The clatter of ceramic and leftover food echoed through the alley, greasy napkins, bits of bread, bones scraped clean, and a near-whole baked potato rolled to the edge of the pile. Shadow flinched, not at the noise, but at the way Tyler's hand moved, swift and dismissive, as if casting away something foul. Tyler turned, saw the dog still watching him, and stepped forward. "Scram," he snapped, stomping toward him. He waved a dish rag in the air as if shooing off a raccoon. "Go on, get out of here." Shadow didn't snarl. He didn't growl or bark. He simply lowered his ears, tucked his tail between his legs, and took 2 slow steps back. His body curved inward with instinctive submission, not fear, but the kind of acceptance that comes when rejection is familiar, expected. Nathan, still standing on the corner, half shielded by falling snow, saw it all unfold. His breath caught in his throat. Something old and raw surged through his chest, not rage, but recognition. He had seen that posture before, not from animals, from people, from himself. It was winter in Ohio, 17 years ago. 11-year-old Nathan, standing on the porch in a threadbare jacket, suitcase in hand, while his uncle slammed the door shut behind him. "Go back to your dad," his uncle had shouted, not knowing Nathan's father would never come back. The snow fell that day too, and Duke, the only warm body beside him, had pressed against his side and refused to move. The memory passed like a knife under the skin. Tyler was already turning back toward the restaurant, muttering to himself, disgusting." But Shadow remained still in the snow, not quite gone, not quite staying. His gaze lingered on the heap of food just beyond the bin, not daring to approach again. Nathan stepped forward now, the crunch of his boots catching Tyler's attention. The waiter turned with a sigh and tried to smile. "Oh, officer, sorry, didn't see you there. Everything okay?" Nathan didn't answer right away. His eyes were still on Shadow, the dog's frame even thinner up close, ribs pressing against matted fur, paws red from salted concrete. Nathan finally spoke, voice calm but low. "Was that necessary?" Tyler blinked. "Excuse me?" The yelling, the food toss, the rag. Nathan's tone didn't rise, but it thickened with quiet weight. "That dog isn't hurting anyone." Tyler shifted, glancing at the restaurant's security camera above the door. "It's not personal. I've seen him out here all week. My manager says if we let one in, we'll have 20 the next night." Nathan looked at him now, eyes steady, unblinking. "You ever ask where he came from?" "He's a stray, probably follows the trash route." "No," Nathan said quietly, shaking his head. "That's not a stray. That's a working dog, or was." He stepped forward and knelt slowly, ignoring the snow soaking through the knee of his uniform. He didn't call out, just waited. Shadow looked at him, really looked, and blinked. For a moment, his tail twitched, not wagging, but processing. Like an old engine trying to turn over. Nathan didn't reach out, didn't make a sound. His eyes softened as if to say, "I'm not here to chase you off." The dog lowered his head slightly, but didn't come closer. Tyler shifted again, now clearly uncomfortable. "Look, I don't mean to be rude, officer, but if customers see him, they might complain." Nathan raised a hand without looking at him. "You can go back inside, I'm good." Tyler hesitated, then slipped inside, letting the warmth swallow him whole. Snow continued to fall, clinging to the edges of Nathan's hat and settling into Shadow's fur. The dog gave a single, shallow exhale, then, ever so slightly, took one small step forward. Nathan felt the corner of his mouth lift, just barely. He didn't move. He didn't need to. The snow had begun to settle again, a soft curtain draping the alley behind Lakeside Grill. It fell without sound, without pause, muffling the world into a slow, cold stillness. Across the room, Maya approached again, holding a breadbasket and wearing a curious look. "Brought you this," she said, placing the basket down. "They just came out of the oven." Nathan nodded distractedly. "Thanks." She hesitated. "Is he okay?" "He's more than okay," Nathan said quietly. "He's a hero." Maya blinked, not sure if he was being metaphorical or literal. Before she could ask more, another customer called her from across the dining room. She offered a brief smile and excused herself. Nathan picked up one of the rolls and tore it in half. Steam curled upward in soft spirals. He placed one half on a small plate near Shadow, though the dog had already turned his head back toward the fireplace, not out of indifference, Nathan suspected, but out of habit. Shadow had learned not to expect more than he was given. He didn't touch the bread, not yet. Nathan turned his attention back to the scanner, noting the full ID tag. He typed it into the Colorado State Police K-9 registry on his phone. Within seconds, the full service record appeared. Shadow. Badge number 1. Breed. German Shepherd. Male. Date of birth. March 14, 2013. Specialty. Explosives detection. Suspect apprehension. Search and rescue. Active years. 2015 to 2023. Partner. Sergeant David Moreno. Final deployment. February 13, 2023. Incident report. Structure explosion during a raid on a narcotics operation. Handler and K-9 missing in debris. Presumed dead. There was a photo. Shadow, younger, his coat glossy, ears upright and proud, stood beside Sergeant Moreno, a tall man with a square jaw and a kind face. They looked solid together, trusted, unbreakable. Nathan's thumb hovered over the screen. 2 years, 2 full years. Had Shadow wandered all this time? From Fort Carson to Silverbrook was nearly 400 miles. Had he been looking for someone, anyone, or had he just been trying to survive? Nathan looked down at the dog beside him. Scars, ribs, dirt, weariness, but also strength. Shadow had carried his duty into the silence of the wilderness, and now he had returned. Not to the station, not to the badge, but to someone who remembered. The murmurs had grown again, though Nathan hadn't meant to draw attention. Shadow's presence had slowly shifted the tone of the restaurant. The quiet clicking of forks had resumed, but it was more tentative now, more self-conscious. Conversations lowered to whispers. Eyes flickered toward the corner table by the fireplace, where a scarred old German shepherd lay with his muzzle resting gently on his paws. The scent of roasted chicken still lingered. Beside it, the untouched roll Nathan had placed hours ago, now cool. Shadow didn't seem to notice the glances. He had long ago stopped expecting to be welcome in places like this. He remained still, his breathing even, his ribs rising and falling beneath his coat like ocean swells. To anyone else, he might have seemed asleep, but Nathan had begun to understand the dog's silence for what it truly was. Vigilance, worn thin. Nathan sat with his hand resting lightly on Shadow's back, the registry still open beside his plate. He had reread Shadow's service record 3 times. It didn't change. The past had found its way here. A sudden clearing of a throat broke through the warmth like a chill. A man in a tailored charcoal vest, pressed slacks, and a name tag reading Mr. Coburn approached the table. His neatly combed gray hair and stern expression projected professionalism and control. Thomas Coburn, the general manager of Lakeside Grill, had worked at the establishment for over 20 years. Known for his no-nonsense approach, He was respected by the kitchen and feared, slightly, by the waitstaff. Coburn believed in tradition, reputation, and above all, presentation. He stopped just short of Nathan's table. "Officer," Coburn said with clipped politeness, "I understand the situation here is unique, but we have policies. Animals, regardless of service history, aren't permitted in the dining area. Health code." Nathan looked up slowly. "He's not a stray." "I can see that," Coburn replied. "Still, some patrons have expressed concern." Nathan didn't ask who. He simply glanced around the restaurant. People looked away quickly. Some coughed. Others suddenly discovered the depths of their wineglasses. Coburn's voice softened, but only slightly. "Surely you understand. It's a matter of precedent. If we allow this once—" "I understand," Nathan interrupted. He rose to his feet. "And if you're telling me I have to choose between staying and forcing this dog back out into the snow, then I'll make it easy." He reached for his coat. "I'm leaving." There was a hush. The tables nearest them had gone still. Maya, the waitress, paused mid-step a few feet away. Claire, the hostess, froze near the entrance. Even the kitchen doors had gone silent. Coburn raised an eyebrow. "I'm not asking you to leave, officer. Just the dog." Nathan's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. He's done more for this country than most people in this room. He was presumed dead in the line of duty. Turns out he survived alone for 2 years. And if you're telling me that his reward is to be thrown back into a snowbank because someone's Pinot Grigio might be slightly less enjoyable, then yeah, I'm leaving. He turned toward Shadow, who had risen now, slowly and uncertainly, ears twitching as if unsure whether danger had returned. And then something small but profound happened. A man from a nearby table stood, late 60s, dressed in a worn tan trench coat and thick glasses, his gray hair combed neatly to the side, a military pin gleaming softly from his lapel. Harold Lenny, a retired postal worker and Vietnam veteran, didn't speak often in public. He walked with a cane from a bad hip, and his hands trembled when he carried coffee. But tonight, he walked over slowly, carefully, and placed a folded bill on Nathan's table. "Dinner's on me," he said softly, voice roughened by time. For him, he patted Shadow once on the shoulder before stepping back. Nathan blinked. "Thank you." Harold nodded once, then returned to his table without waiting for acknowledgement. There was a moment of stillness. Then a woman in a dark green turtleneck, Barbara, mid-50s, a school principal with cropped silver hair and a demeanor both warm and steel-edged, rose and stepped forward. "Make that 2 dinners," she said, placing a crisp 20 next to the 50, "and maybe a blanket." Another hand reached across the aisle, then another. A younger man in a leather jacket, a trucker named Dale, dropped a 10. For the dog, who outran a damn explosion. Even Maya, the waitress, pulled a 5 from her apron and added it to the growing pile. "He saved someone's life once," she said. "Maybe it's time we return the favor." Coburn watched it unfold with something unreadable in his eyes. His lips pressed into a thin line, his spine straighter than before. For a long second, he said nothing. Then he gave a slow nod. "He can stay," he said simply, and walked away. Nathan let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. He sat down again. Shadow lowered himself beside him, resting his head back on his paws. The pile of bills lay untouched, not for payment, not for charity, but for dignity, for remembrance, and for a dog who had survived everything except being forgotten. Outside, snow thickened around Lakeside Grill, painting the street in a quiet white glow. Inside, the warmth wrapped around Nathan like a long-lost memory. At his feet, Shadow lay curled, belly full for the first time in what seemed like an eternity. His ribs, once prominent beneath patchy fur, now rose and fell in a calm rhythm. But what struck Nathan most wasn't the stillness. It was the way the dog had nestled against his boots, as if he'd finally let himself belong. Nathan looked down at the old German shepherd. "You didn't just need food," he murmured. "You needed someone." Just then, the door swung open and a gust of cold air swept through. A man stepped in, tall, lean, with a peppered beard and sharp hazel eyes. He wore a dark green parka with a patch that read Drive. Eli Warren, DVM. Eli had been Nathan's friend since academy days, back when Nathan was a reckless cadet with too much to prove, and Eli had already chosen a quieter path in animal medicine. Eli was known in town for his calm demeanor and dry wit, often using humor to hide the fact that he cared too much. "Got your message," Eli said as he approached the table. "He the one?" Nathan nodded. "Yeah, found him outside the window, staring in like he remembered what it was like to be loved." Eli crouched down beside Shadow, his voice gentle but firm. "Hey there, soldier," he said, examining the dog's face and running his hands along the spine. "May I?" Shadow lifted his head briefly, made eye contact, then rested it again. Permission granted. The room around them had grown quieter as patrons watched the scene unfold. Eli checked the pads of the paws, the ears, then ran a handheld scanner along the neck where the chip was embedded. "No fever," Eli said softly. "Scars on the neck from an old injury, but they've healed. A few calluses, teeth worn, old for sure, but nothing alarming. Lungs are clear, eyes still sharp. I'd say he just needs a warm place and a reason to get up in the morning." Nathan's jaw tightened. "I can give him that." A few tables away, a woman in her 30s sat with her son, Benji, a boy no more than 9. His sandy hair was a mess, his fingers twisted in the hem of his hoodie. His mother, Melissa, was petite, with tired eyes that carried months of worry. Benji had been diagnosed with selective mutism and autism spectrum disorder a year earlier. Since then, the world had gone quiet around him. He hadn't spoken a word outside the home, barely made eye contact with strangers. But something shifted. As Eli stood and gave Nathan a light nod, Benji slid out of his seat. Melissa's eyes widened, but she didn't stop him. The boy walked slowly toward Shadow, now sitting upright beside Nathan's chair. Shadow didn't move, he simply watched, his tail giving a single soft thump on the wooden floor. Benji reached out, hesitated, then placed a trembling hand on Shadow's fur. Gasps sounded from nearby tables, not alarm, but awe. Melissa covered her mouth, her eyes brimming with tears. That's the first time he's ever." Nathan looked between the boy and the dog. Something unspoken passed between them, older than words, deeper than gestures. Shadow, sensing the boy's energy, leaned forward and gently nudged Benji's arm with his nose. The boy smiled. It wasn't big or dramatic, but it was the kind of smile parents remember forever. Eli turned to Nathan. "Well, I'd say he's already earning his keep." Nathan let out a short laugh, not of humor, but disbelief. "Yeah, he's doing more than I ever expected." Outside, the wind howled, but inside, the air felt warm and still. As the evening wore on, people approached the table one by one. Some offered kind words, others dropped small donations. A few simply paused to look into Shadow's eyes, eyes that no longer seemed hollow. Nathan reached into his coat and pulled out his phone. He tapped in a few numbers. After a few rings, a voice answered. "Hey, it's me," he said. "I'll need an extra blanket tonight, for a guest." He glanced down. Shadow had shifted, leaning entirely against Nathan's boot. His breathing was steady, content. "You're not just a stray anymore," Nathan whispered. "You're family now." The first snow of December fell softly over the town of Bellwood, blanketing rooftops and quiet streets in gentle white. Nathan stepped out of his modest one-story house near the edge of town, zipping up his coat as the wind whistled faintly between the trees. Beside him stood Shadow, no longer the trembling, skeletal creature from that snowy night weeks ago, but a proud German shepherd with a slow, steady gait and a glimmer of purpose in his aging eyes. Shadow's fur had thickened with care, his ribs no longer visible beneath the coat, though his movements still carried the stiffness of years of wear. The light in his gaze had returned. Each morning he greeted Nathan with a quiet grunt and a nudge of the nose. Each night he curled by the foot of the bed, not in fear, but in contentment. Nathan had signed the adoption papers the morning after the Lakeside Grill incident. Officially, Shadow now belonged to him. Unofficially, the bond had been sealed long before, in a glance exchanged through glass, in a silent decision beneath a street lamp. Life settled into rhythm. Nathan returned to patrol shifts. Shadow rode in the backseat of the cruiser, head sometimes poking between the seats, tongue lolling. Most calls were mundane, noise complaints, speeding, the occasional drunk dispute outside a bar. But one morning, something shifted. They'd just finished a routine patrol when Shadow grew restless. His ears perked up. He sniffed the air, then let out a low, deliberate bark. Nathan glanced in the rearview mirror. You smell something? He asked. Shadow stood, pacing in the back. He pressed a paw against the glass and let out another bark, sharper this time. Nathan pulled over. They were near an old construction site, abandoned for over 2 years after the development company went bankrupt. A few skeletal frames of houses stood, half-finished, already crumbling. Most of the area had been fenced off, but kids still snuck in sometimes. Nathan had been there twice in the last year, chasing off vandals. All right, let's check it out. He clipped the leash to Shadow's collar, but the dog barely waited. He pulled forward, nose to the ground, tail low and focused. His movements were methodical, not frantic, purposeful. Shadow led Nathan past the broken fence, through patches of overgrown weeds, and toward one of the half-built homes. The scent trail led them into what would have been a living room. There, Shadow stopped and growled. Nathan turned on his flashlight. The beam caught something metallic buried under a collapsed plank. He crouched, brushed the debris away, and revealed a half-buried duffel bag. Inside were gloves, bolt cutters, a crowbar, and a distinctive wallet with a police department seal. It belonged to Officer Greg Hansen, missing for 6 weeks. Nathan's breath caught. He called it in immediately. Within an hour, the site was cordoned off. Evidence teams swept the area, and Shadow sat calmly beside him, tail wagging once every few minutes as if he knew what he'd done. Captain Maria Alvarez arrived on scene, bundled in a tan overcoat and red scarf. Mid-50s, strong-jawed, with silver-streaked black hair. She'd earned her rank through grit and consistency, not politics. She was known for her attention to detail and a surprising fondness for animals. Though she rarely showed emotion at work, she crouched beside Shadow, one hand extended, letting him sniff before scratching behind his ear. "I heard you found something worth gold, old boy," she said, a rare softness in her voice. Nathan nodded. "He led me straight here, no hesitation." A week later, after a chain of evidence linked fingerprints on the tools to Lyle Hargrove, a 38-year-old drifter with a record of break-ins and suspected arson, another revelation came to light. Lyle's prints matched a detonator casing recovered from the 2-year-old blast in Colorado that had reportedly claimed Shadow's former handler and left the K9 missing. Somehow, against all odds, Shadow had not only survived, but had now led investigators to the man responsible. The department scheduled a commendation ceremony for the following Friday. The station's briefing room was transformed for the occasion. A banner read "Service Beyond Duty." Officers and civilians alike filled the seats. Reporters from the local paper set up in the back. At the front stood Captain Alvarez, badge gleaming. Shadow stood beside Nathan, wearing a freshly polished K9 vest, not as a relic of a past life, but as a symbol of rebirth. Alvarez's voice rang out clear. "Some officers serve with words, some with actions, and some, though they cannot speak, serve with heart, instinct, and bravery. Today, we honor a hero who returned from the shadows to shine light on justice." She bent down and clipped a silver tag onto Shadow's collar. "Shadow, Honorary K9 Deputy, Bellwood Police Department." The room erupted into applause. Shadow looked around, confused for a moment. Then, slowly, for the first time in public, his tail began to wag, not the timid flutter of a nervous animal, but a proud, confident swing. Afterward, Nathan walked him out under the winter stars. The snow had started again, falling soft like it had that first night, but now it didn't feel cold. It felt like memory folding into hope. He opened the cruiser door and Shadow hopped in, stiff but steady. Nathan turned the key and the red and blue lights flickered across the white road. "You ready, partner?" Nathan asked. Shadow barked once. They drove into the night, no longer strangers. Not rescuer and rescued, but a team. The old dog didn't just find a home. He awakened forgotten memories, stitched together the frayed edges of lonely hearts, and reminded a weary town that some souls are never truly lost. Shadow, once cast aside in the snow, became a quiet sentinel of hope, loyalty, and second chances. In the hush of winter's grip, one act of kindness unraveled something deeper, a ripple that reached across generations, across wounds too old to name. Perhaps we all have a shadow in our lives, something abandoned that still waits quietly to be seen again. So, as you return to your day, whether it's the hum of a morning coffee or the stillness of night, remember, love, like loyalty, Doesn't need to be loud to be heard.
If this tale moved you, if you felt the tension, the heartbreak, and the triumph, please support our channel by hitting the like button and subscribing. Your support means the world to us and helps us bring more thrilling, emotional, and inspiring stories your way. Leave a comment below and let us know what you think. Do you believe dogs have an extraordinary sixth sense? Share your thoughts and personal stories with us. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.